Ethan Cole hadn't meant to end up here, not in this quiet corner of nowhere, and certainly not with a toolbox in one hand and his daughter's tiny backpack slung over the other shoulder. But life, as he'd learned, rarely asked for permission. After losing his wife 2 years ago, he'd walked away from the noise of city contracts and steel structures, trading them for something slower, quieter, even if he still wasn't sure what that was. Willowbend Farm was the last place on the list, a faded address scribbled on the corner of an email. He hadn't expected much when he pulled up, just another job fixing sagging beams and weathered floors. But as he stepped out of the truck, Lila tugging gently at his sleeve, something about the place held him still. The farmhouse stood silent beneath the morning sun, its white paint cracked and flaking like bark. Tall grasses swayed around it, wildflowers blooming in places they probably weren't meant to. It looked forgotten, but not unloved. "Is this it, Daddy?" Lila asked, her voice small but full of hope. Ethan nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, kiddo, this is it." From the porch, a woman stepped into view. She was younger than he'd expected, early 30s maybe, with quiet eyes and a calm presence that made the air feel still. She wore simple clothes and a wide-brimmed hat, the kind that belonged to someone who understood the sun and didn't mind getting dirt under her nails. "You must be Mr. Cole," she called out, her voice even but warm. "Ethan," he replied, closing the distance, "and this is Lila." Charlotte Hayes offered a small nod, her expression unreadable. "I'm the one who hired you." He glanced back at the house. "You mentioned it needs work." She hesitated for half a breath. "I want it done by hand. No quick fixes, just you." Ethan blinked, surprised. "That'll take time." Charlotte's gaze didn't waver. "I'm counting on it." And just like that, something unspoken settled between them, an understanding not written in any contract, the kind that grows slowly, quietly, like roots beneath old soil. The inside of Willowbend Farm was quiet in a way that felt intentional, like the house had learned to hold its breath, waiting for someone to listen. Ethan stepped into the front room, Lila close behind, her small hands still wrapped around the strap of her backpack. Dust floated through the beams of morning light, catching in the air like snowflakes. The floorboards groaned beneath his boots, but not in protest, more like recognition. Charlotte stayed near the doorway, arms folded loosely, eyes scanning the space as if measuring what was left of something long gone. "Has anyone lived here recently?" Ethan asked, glancing around at the sagging ceiling and faded wallpaper. She shook her head. "Not in a while. I come by sometimes, just to check on things." Ha! There were old photographs still nailed to the walls, sepia-tone images of people long past, standing stiff in Sunday clothes in front of a younger, stronger version of the same house. A ceramic vase stood half-cracked on a shelf, filled with dried lavender and dust. Lila wandered toward the fireplace, her curiosity leading her from one corner to the next. "It smells like a story in here," she said with a wrinkle of her nose. Charlotte's lips curved just slightly. "Maybe it is." Ethan ran his hand along the edge of a windowsill, feeling the splinters catch on his skin. The structure wasn't beyond saving, not yet, but it would take time, patience, maybe even something more. He turned to Charlotte. "Why not just sell it? Hire someone to knock it all down and start fresh?" She looked away for a moment, toward the window. Outside, the wind moved through the fields in long waves. "Because some things don't need to be replaced," she said. "They just need someone who's willing to see what's still good underneath." It wasn't just about the house. Ethan could hear it in her voice, the weight behind her words. She wasn't here to rebuild walls. She was trying to rebuild herself, same as him. In the back corner, Lila let out a soft "ooh" and knelt beside an old wooden bench. She lifted a worn book from beneath it, its leather cover cracked with age. "Look, Daddy, it's a garden journal." Ethan crouched beside her, flipping through the yellowed pages. Inside were hand-drawn layouts of flower beds, notes about planting seasons, and lists of vegetables, carrots, squash, tomatoes. Some pages were marked with smudges of dirt, others with delicate handwriting and faded ink. Charlotte moved closer, but didn't speak. Her eyes landed on the book like she'd seen it 100 times, but never dared to open it. "I think we should bring this garden back," Lila said matter-of-factly. "It's sad when plants don't get taken care of." Ethan smiled, then looked to Charlotte. "What do you think?" She paused, then nodded slowly. "It could use some color." It was a small thing, a suggestion, an agreement, but Ethan felt the shift in the room. The quiet between them was no longer empty. It was full of possibility. Later, as they stepped outside, Charlotte lingered at the porch while Ethan and Lila walked toward the truck to unload tools. He glanced back once and saw her there, one hand brushing lightly against the railing, her face tilted up to the wind. He couldn't explain it, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The next morning, as the sun cast pale gold across the fields, Charlotte stepped onto the porch with a set of old brass keys in her hand. "I was thinking," she said, her voice calm but purposeful, "it doesn't make sense for you two to keep driving back and forth every day. There's a small room in the back, was once the caretaker's quarters. It's nothing fancy, but it's clean. You're welcome to stay until the work's done." Ethan blinked, surprised. "Are you sure?" Charlotte met his eyes steadily. "I wouldn't offer if I wasn't." He hesitated, then glanced down at Lila, who was busy trying to balance a sunflower seed packet on her nose. She didn't need convincing. A sleepover in an old farmhouse? It sounded like magic to her. "Thank you," he said finally. "We'll try not to be in the way." Charlotte gave a small smile. "You won't be." The room was simple, wood-paneled walls, a twin bed, and an old dresser that creaked when opened. But it was warm, and for the first time in months, it felt like a place where quiet didn't mean empty. That afternoon, they started on the garden. The earth was stubborn, hard-packed from years of neglect, tangled with weeds and dry roots. But Lila tackled it with the enthusiasm only a 7-year-old could summon, kneeling beside the beds with gloved hands and a determined squint. Charlotte joined them with a small tin box filled with seed packets, corners curled, ink faded, but each envelope still whispering promise. She knelt beside Lila, opening the box as if revealing something sacred. "These were my mother's," she said. "She kept them long after she stopped planting. Said hope doesn't expire." Lila's eyes lit up. "What kind of flowers did she grow?" "Mostly roses, but she always snuck in sunflowers just for fun." Ethan listened from a few feet away, repairing the warped edges of the beds. He couldn't help but glance at Charlotte as she spoke. How her voice softened when she talked about her mother, the way her fingers brushed gently over the seed envelopes like they carried more than just petals. By mid-afternoon, they had cleared out 3 garden beds, drawn new rows, and planted 2 full packets of sunflower seeds. Lila insisted they name each mound: Sunny, Goldie, Captain Bloom, and Charlotte didn't object, only laughed in that quiet, almost forgotten way that made Ethan look up every time he heard it. "Do you think they'll grow tall?" Lila asked as she patted down the last patch. "If we give them what they need," Charlotte replied, "they'll surprise us." Nachenstorm. She wasn't just talking about the sunflowers. Later, as the sun dipped low behind the trees, the 3 of them sat on the front steps with lemonade in hand. 3 mismatched glasses, the kind you find in forgotten cupboards that still hold charm. Lila leaned against Ethan, yawning. "Can we stay here forever?" she mumbled. Ethan looked at Charlotte, who was gazing out across the darkening yard. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "I think," she said, "forever starts with a single season." Something shifted in Ethan then. Something quiet but real. He didn't say anything, but as he carried Lila inside, he knew. They weren't just fixing a house. They were growing something. The wind began to shift 2 days after they moved into the caretaker's quarters. At first, it was nothing more than a rustle through the trees, the kind that brushed gently against the windows and made Lila giggle as she watched the branches sway like dancers in the dusk. But by late afternoon, the sky had turned a bruised gray, and the air had that unmistakable scent. Ozone, damp earth, and something ancient, like the land itself was holding its breath. Ethan stepped out onto the porch, wiping his hands on a rag. He'd been reinforcing one of the window frames in the front room, and the sudden stillness in the air made him pause. Overhead, clouds stacked high and heavy, rolling in from the east like a tide about to break. Charlotte joined him a moment later, a basket of kindling in her arms. Her eyes narrowed as she looked up. "That wind's shifting," she murmured, more to herself than to him. Ethan nodded. "Feels like it'll hit hard." She didn't argue. Instead, she handed him the basket and said, "I'll grab the shutters. Help me with the south windows?" Together, they moved with quiet urgency. No panic, just practiced hands and unspoken teamwork. Ethan was surprised at how naturally she moved, how she knew exactly which shutter stuck, and how to brace the porch swing so it wouldn't tear loose. She didn't flinch at the hammering or the rope burns on her palms. There was strength in her, the kind that didn't shout but didn't back down either. "Not your first storm," he said, glancing at her between tasks. Charlotte gave a tight smile, tucking a stray strand of hair beneath her hat. "Grew up with them. Best thing you can do is stand firm." Inside, Lila curled up by the fireplace, the garden journal in her lap. She traced her finger over the sun-shaped sketches she and Charlotte had drawn the day before, whispering names to herself as she waited out the gathering storm. The first drops came in a hush, tapping against the windows like hesitant fingers. Then all at once the sky opened up. Rain came down in sheets, hammering the roof and dancing across the porch. Wind howled around the corners of the farmhouse, and the old wooden walls creaked as though remembering storms from long ago. Charlotte lit candles, moving through the house with calm precision. Ethan watched her as he stood by the window, his gaze fixed on the trees bending low under the weight of the storm. He was tense, and she could see it in his shoulders, the way his body remained ready to move, to fix, to defend. "You okay?" she asked gently, setting down a candle near the hearth. He nodded, then after a pause said, "Storms make me alert. I think it's the silence before them that gets me. It's like waiting for something you can't stop." Charlotte folded her hands in front of her, then sat down across from him. The candlelight flickered between them, casting soft shadows on the worn walls. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked after a while. "The city?" She shook her head. "The life before. The version of yourself you used to be." Ethan thought about that, about the man who used to wear suits and walk through skyscraper sites with blueprints in hand. The man who believed in deadlines and budgets more than rhythm or patience. The man who still had a wife who danced with Lila in the kitchen. "Sometimes," he said honestly, "but that version of me wasn't built to last. I didn't know how to slow down, or how to stop and watch my daughter talk to flowers." Charlotte smiled at that. A real one this time, not the kind that guarded itself halfway. "I used to be someone else too," she said, her voice quiet. "Someone people listened to in boardrooms and followed in conferences. I built something big, successful, but I burned out. I lost myself trying to keep everyone else afloat." Ethan didn't speak right away. He just listened, really listened, as she continued. "I thought if I stepped away, I could disappear, just exist in the silence. But the silence started to feel like guilt, like I'd failed somehow by walking away." "It's not failure," Ethan said. "It's choosing peace." Their eyes met then, and something in the room shifted, subtle but undeniable. The storm still raged outside, but here, in this quiet corner of the world, something tender had begun to grow. Lila's voice broke the silence. "Daddy, the journal says roses are strong. Even if they get hurt, they bloom again." Ethan smiled, walking over to sit beside her. You're right, sweetheart. Charlotte watched them, her expression unreadable. There was a warmth in her gaze, but also something deeper, longing maybe, or the ache of recognition. She wasn't used to letting people stay. She had spent years building walls she pretended were fences. Later, after Lila had drifted off to sleep beneath a quilt Charlotte had pulled from an old cedar chest, Ethan stepped out onto the porch again. The rain had slowed, now falling in soft, steady rhythms. The fields shimmered under the moonlight, silver and soaked and still. Charlotte joined him, a mug of tea in her hands. She didn't speak, not at first, just stood beside him, shoulder to shoulder, watching the world settle. I'm not good at this, she said quietly, letting people in. Ethan looked at her. You don't have to be good at it. You just have to be willing. She glanced down at her mug, then back out at the dark horizon. I wasn't expecting this, any of it. Neither was I, he said. But I'm glad we're here. Another pause, this one longer. The kind that only comes when words don't need to fill the space. Finally, she asked, do you think people can grow back, like the garden? Ethan didn't look away. I think we already are. Charlotte closed her eyes for a breath, letting the rain and silence wash through her. When she opened them, she smiled. Not the practiced smile of someone keeping distance, but the real, unguarded kind. And that night, long after the candles had burned low and the storm had passed, Willowbend Farm felt just a little more like home. The house had settled into a hush so complete that Charlotte could hear the rhythm of her own breath as she lay awake in the small bedroom she hadn't slept in for years. The storm had passed, leaving the air damp and cool, and somewhere outside a barn owl called out into the dark. She had thought sleep would come easily after the long day. Sunflowers planted, shutters nailed shut against the wind, laughter echoing faintly from the porch hours earlier. But it hadn't, not tonight. Not with the weight in her chest that refused to be named. Charlotte pushed back the covers, careful not to disturb the creaking floorboards, and stepped into the hallway barefoot. She passed Lila's room first. Ethan had tucked her in hours ago, and from within came the soft, even sound of a child's dreams. Safe, steady, warm. She found herself drawn to the front of the house, where the dim yellow glow of the porch light spilled through the glass like candlelight. Through the screen door, she could just make out a figure. Ethan, seated on the top step, elbows resting on his knees, head tilted as if he were trying to listen to something far beyond the reach of sound. His silhouette stretched across the siding behind him, long and solemn. The way he sat, still, thoughtful alone, felt achingly familiar. Charlotte opened the door quietly and stepped out. Her presence made no noise, but he noticed her all the same. Couldn't sleep either? He asked without turning. She shook her head, arms wrapped around herself more from thought than cold. No, the silence is louder at night. Ethan nodded, eyes fixed on some point beyond the edge of the field. Yeah, it is. She hesitated, then sank down beside him, close but not quite touching. The porch boards were cool beneath her legs. For a while they just sat there, two figures in the quiet, surrounded by the scent of wet earth and old wood. Then in a voice so low it nearly vanished into the breeze, Charlotte said, I used to think I had the perfect life. Ethan glanced at her but didn't interrupt. I had a husband. We were trying for a child. There were doctor visits, vitamins, names picked out years before we even started trying seriously. And then, when it finally happened, it felt like the world lined up. Just right. She paused. Until the accident. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the porch step. I lost the baby, she said, the words dry but heavy, and with it, my ability to ever carry again. Ethan's face didn't shift, but his whole body seemed to lean just slightly in her direction. My husband, he tried, at first, but grief changes people. And one day it wasn't us anymore. It was just him, and eventually, someone else. He has a daughter now. Charlotte looked out across the dark yard. I came back here after the divorce. This house belonged to my grandmother. I thought if I stayed quiet enough, maybe life would stop noticing me. She expected silence. Maybe a gentle, "I'm sorry." What she didn't expect was Ethan's voice, soft and steady. "My wife died 2 years ago. Sudden illness. One of those things they say happens to someone else until it doesn't." Charlotte turned to him, surprised by the calm in his voice. Not numb, just honest. "Lila was 5, he continued. She didn't understand much, but she knew enough to ask me if Mommy would still be able to tuck her in from heaven. I told her yes, even though I didn't believe in much of anything back then." He rubbed his hands together slowly, fingers rough and calloused. "I didn't know how to be both parents. I still don't, most days. But we make it work. She's stronger than I give her credit for." They sat in the quiet again, but it wasn't empty this time. It was full of grief, yes, but also understanding. "I think," Charlotte said after a moment, "the hardest part isn't the pain. It's the pieces it breaks you into and figuring out how to live with the version of yourself that's left." Ethan looked at her. The porch light caught the curve of her jaw, the small crease between her brows, the shine of emotion just barely held back. "You're not broken," he said quietly. "You're someone who kept going." She let out a slow breath. "Some days I don't feel like I move forward, just away." They didn't look at each other. They didn't need to. It was enough to sit close in the hush of the night, where pain could breathe without having to explain itself. A breeze stirred. Charlotte shifted slightly, brushing her hand back from her knee. In that small motion, her fingers grazed Ethan's hand, just the lightest touch, accidental, almost unnoticeable. But it was enough. They both stilled, eyes darting down to where skin had met skin, even for a heartbeat. The moment hung suspended in the air, caught somewhere between breath and memory. Sorry," she murmured, withdrawing her hand. "No, it's okay," Ethan said quickly, but he looked away, a faint flush on his cheek. The silence returned, awkward now, but not unwelcome. They were two people unused to letting anyone close, two people who had built their lives on cautious distance, and yet here they were, not quite touching, not quite turning away. Charlotte stood slowly. "I should get back inside," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Ethan nodded, rising with her. "Yeah, me too." They didn't say goodnight, only exchanged a look that said enough. Then Charlotte slipped inside, her bare feet soft against the wooden floor, leaving Ethan alone on the porch once more. But this time, when he looked out into the dark, the loneliness didn't bite quite so hard. And upstairs, as Charlotte curled into the quilt that still smelled faintly of cedar and rosemary, the silence felt less like a burden and more like a space being made for something not yet spoken, but slowly taking root. The morning after their late-night conversation, the world felt unusually quiet. Charlotte stood at the kitchen sink, hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug, staring out the window at the soaked earth outside. The rain had given way to sunlight, soft and golden, the kind that felt earned after a long night. The ground still glistened with moisture, and mist curled low along the garden beds like breath slowly leaving the land. She hadn't slept much, but she didn't feel tired. Instead, there was a kind of lightness in her chest she hadn't known in years. Not peace, not yet, but a sense that maybe peace was somewhere nearby, just waiting for her to reach it. Behind her, soft footsteps pattered across the floor. "Morning." Ethan's voice came from the doorway, lower than usual, quiet but steady. Charlotte turned slightly, offering a small nod. "Morning." He moved past her without fuss, filling the kettle and setting it on the stove. There was no awkwardness between them, only something unspoken, like a book left open between chapters. Neither of them rushed to close it. "Lila's still sleeping," Ethan said as he leaned against the counter. "She was up late talking in her sleep. Something about planting a lemon tree in her closet." Charlotte chuckled softly. "She's got imagination. That's something we lose too easily as adults." Ethan glanced at her, and for a brief moment their eyes met and held. There was a different kind of quiet between them now, one that invited rather than pushed away. They spent the rest of the morning outside, clearing the mud-slick tools, righting a toppled trellis, checking for damage the storm might have left behind. The porch swing had survived. The sunflowers, newly planted, stood undisturbed in their fresh beds, as if the wind had known to leave them alone. Lila joined them shortly after, still in pajamas, her hair tousled and eyes squinting against the sun. "I dreamed the flowers talked," she said, rubbing her eyes. Charlotte smiled. "What did they say?" "They told me to be patient. That growing takes time." Ethan looked at his daughter, then at Charlotte. "Smart flowers." Over the next few days, something shifted between the three of them, not suddenly but gently. The way morning dew fades into sunlight, or how lavender scent lingers even after the breeze has passed. Ethan began fixing the back porch, Charlotte sanding and repainting the kitchen cabinets, Lila bouncing between them like a bee in bloom. The garden became their shared rhythm, each day bringing new weeds to pull, new sprouts to water, new bits of quiet conversation to fill the space between. Ethan cooked dinner one night, rosemary chicken with roasted vegetables, and Charlotte surprised them both by baking. Her apple crisp came out a little overcooked, but Lila declared it perfect, and Ethan didn't disagree. They ate by candlelight when the electricity flickered, the meal warm and unhurried. Later, Charlotte caught herself watching Ethan as he read a story to Lila on the porch. His voice was steady, soft, each word spoken with a patience born of loss and love intertwined. Lila leaned against his arm, thumb tucked under her chin, her eyes growing heavy. And Charlotte, she felt something in her chest again, something gentle, something dangerous. She turned away before Ethan looked up. That night they found themselves sitting on the steps again, mugs of tea in hand. No rain this time, just stars and silence. "It's easier with you around," Charlotte said after a while, not looking at him. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "The repairs?" She smiled faintly. "Everything." He looked at her then, and in the soft starlight, her face looked younger, or maybe just lighter. "You make it easier too," he replied. "I didn't think I'd be able to feel normal again. Not this soon." "I'm not sure either of us are normal," Charlotte teased gently. He chuckled. "Fair enough." A breeze passed through, lifting Charlotte's hair. She tucked it behind her ear, then let her hand fall to rest near his on the step. This time, neither of them pulled away. Their fingers didn't intertwine. They didn't need to. The proximity was enough. The unspoken comfort of presence, of two people who had spent enough time alone to understand the value of simply sitting beside someone who stayed. The next morning, Charlotte woke to the smell of fresh coffee and the sound of Lila's laughter outside the window. She rose slowly, stepping into the light spilling across the floorboards. Through the kitchen window, she saw Ethan teaching Lila how to hammer a nail into one of the garden boxes. He crouched beside her, patient, guiding her hands. It was such a simple thing, and yet it made Charlotte's chest ache in the most beautiful way. Later that afternoon, as they planted the final row of marigolds, Ethan looked over at Charlotte and said, "This place, it feels different now." She glanced up from where she knelt, dirt under her nails, sunlight warm on her back. "Different how?" "Like it's meant to hold more than just memories. Like it's becoming something again." Charlotte paused, her hand resting against the soft soil. Then, almost in a whisper, she replied, "So am I." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Because as the sun dipped low behind the trees and the breeze danced through the garden, there was no need for declarations or grand gestures. Some healing speaks not in words, but in the way two people slowly build something side by side. The sun had long dipped below the trees, and the farmhouse was wrapped in that gentle hush that only comes when the day has finally exhaled. The kitchen was clean, dishes stacked, the garden quiet. Upstairs, Ethan had just finished tucking Lila into bed when he remembered he'd left his sketchbook on the porch. He stepped out, leaving the door slightly ajar behind him. A few minutes passed. Then came the soft sound of footsteps padding across the wooden hallway. Charlotte was folding a blanket on the old sofa in the sitting room when Lila appeared, pajama-clad and clutching a worn hardcover book to her chest. "Hi," the little girl said, her voice quiet but clear. Charlotte turned, smiling gently. "Hey, sweetheart. Couldn't sleep." Lila shook her head, then held out the book. "I was going to ask Daddy to read to me, but I kind of wanted to ask you." Charlotte's heart gave a subtle lurch. "You sure?" Lila nodded. "You read slow, like you're painting the words. I like that." Charlotte chuckled softly, reaching out. "All right then, come on." They settled into the big armchair near the fireplace. Lila curled up against her side like she'd always belonged there. Charlotte opened the book, The Secret Garden, the same copy they'd found together in one of the dusty drawers, and began reading, her voice steady and warm. Lila leaned her head against Charlotte's shoulder, listening with wide eyes. But as the story unfolded, her breathing slowed, and her fingers wrapped more tightly around Charlotte's arm. After a few pages, she spoke, voice small and vulnerable. "Can I sleep with you tonight?" Charlotte looked down, surprised but not startled. "You miss your dad?" Lila shook her head. "Not like that. I miss being near someone who feels like a mom." Charlotte's breath caught. She closed the book gently and placed it on the table. "I know you're not," Lila said quickly, looking up. "But when you read and when you talk about flowers and make cookies that aren't perfect, it feels like how I remember it." Charlotte didn't know what to say. Words felt too small for the weight in Lila's eyes. "I just want to be held," Lila added, her voice cracking a little. "It's been a while." Charlotte reached out slowly, pulling the little girl into her arms. Lila melted into the hug, her small frame fitting perfectly against Charlotte's chest, like a puzzle piece that had been waiting to be found. "Of course you can stay," Charlotte whispered into her hair, "as long as you need." That night, Lila fell asleep quickly, fingers tangled in Charlotte's shirt, breath soft and even. Charlotte lay awake for a long time, one hand resting gently on the child's back, her heart aching in that quiet, inexplicable way love always arrives, unexpected and all at once. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but in that moment, with Lila curled beside her and the world finally still, Charlotte felt something settle inside her, a kind of belonging, a kind of beginning. The next morning, Ethan found Lila's bed empty. For a fleeting second, a father's instinct stirred, worry flickering like a match before logic caught up. Then he heard soft voices coming from down the hall, followed by the warm, unmistakable sound of laughter. He walked quietly towards Charlotte's room, careful not to intrude. But when he reached the open door, he paused. Lila was sitting cross-legged on Charlotte's bed, still in her pajamas, her hair a tangled mess. Charlotte sat beside her, brushing it gently, her hands steady, her voice low and rhythmic as she hummed something old and sweet. Lila leaned into the touch like a cat in the sun. Ethan didn't say anything. He just watched for a moment, and in that moment, something settled in him too. It wasn't just the tenderness between the two, it was how natural it felt, as if, somehow, this had been waiting to happen all along. Like Charlotte was always meant to be part of their mornings, their rhythms, their home. That evening, as they sat on the porch together, Lila between them painting watercolor flowers on torn notebook paper, Charlotte looked out toward the fields and said, "I've been thinking." Ethan raised an eyebrow, waiting. "This place used to be part of something bigger," she continued. The community used to gather here, planting days, harvest potlucks, summer nights with lemonade and porch songs. Ethan smiled. Sounds a lot better than the city picnics we used to get. Lukewarm potato salad and awkward small talk. Charlotte chuckled. I want to bring that back, even just a little. You mean invite people? She nodded, tentative but firm. It doesn't have to be much, just neighbors, food, some music. Nothing fancy. I think the land's ready for laughter again. And maybe, though she didn't say it aloud, so was she. In the days that followed, the idea took root faster than Charlotte had imagined. Lila made hand-drawn invitations with sunflowers and smiley faces. Ethan fixed the old picnic tables and hung string lights across the porch beams. Charlotte baked in batches, burning the first few loaves but laughing at herself instead of retreating from the kitchen like she once would have. Neighbors came slowly at first, curious, hesitant, but word spread fast in a small town. That Saturday, as the afternoon sun settled low and golden over Willowbend Farm, the once silent fields came alive with voices. Families arrived carrying pie tins and casseroles, folding chairs and ukuleles. Children darted through the garden paths, chasing fireflies that hadn't even come out yet. Lila showed everyone the sunflower beds and introduced Charlotte as the boss of the flowers. Ethan grilled on a makeshift barbecue, sleeves rolled up, cheeks sun-kissed. He moved like a man at ease, not performing, not hiding, just present. Charlotte stood under the porch awning, apron dusted with flour, watching it all unfold. The lights glowed softly above her, and for a moment she allowed herself to feel it. Not fear, not sadness, but something braver. Joy. It was Elma, the elderly woman from the neighboring farm, who made her way to Charlotte near sundown, gripping a cane but standing tall. You know, she said, nodding toward the crowd, your grandmother would have loved this. She used to sing on that porch while we shelled peas till midnight. Charlotte's throat tightened. She taught me everything I forgot for too long. Elma placed a weathered hand on her arm. Well, you remember just in time. Nearby, Lila ran across the grass with a wildflower crown sliding off her head. She beamed when she spotted Charlotte and tugged her toward the garden beds. Come see what we made, she cried. Ethan was already there, crouching beside a freshly dug patch beneath the willow tree. A young apple sapling stood in the center, soil packed tight around its roots. A small wooden sign beside it read, Clara, for the women who help things grow. Charlotte's breath caught in her chest. Lila picked the name, Ethan said softly, brushing dirt from his hands. She said it sounded strong. It was my grandmother's name, Charlotte whispered. Lila tugged on her hand again. It's our tree now, me and Daddy. And you too, Mommy Charlotte? Ethan's eyes widened, startled, but Charlotte didn't flinch. Her gaze trembled for a moment, then softened as she knelt down and hugged Lila tight. I'd be honored. That night, when the guests had left and the porch was littered with crumbs and echoes of laughter, the three of them sat quietly beneath the hanging lights. Charlotte leaned back in her chair, Lila drowsy in her lap, and looked out at the darkened field. I thought I came here to be alone, she said, but maybe I came here to remember I didn't have to be. Ethan turned toward her, his voice low. It feels like home now. She looked down at the girl nestled against her chest, then at him. It is. And for the first time in years, Charlotte didn't wonder when the other shoe would drop. She didn't brace for loss. She simply breathed and stayed. Summer lingered longer than usual that year, as if the season itself refused to rush what was quietly blooming at Willowbend Farm. The days stretched out warm and golden, filled with the kind of work that left hands sore but hearts full. Patching the last of the barn roof, repainting the back fence, replanting herbs that had withered during the spring storms. There was always something to fix, always something to tend. and yet none of it felt like burden. Not anymore. Ethan and Charlotte worked side by side most days, rarely needing many words between them. Their rhythm had become its own kind of language. Measured glances, shared tools, soft smiles exchanged over fresh coffee in the early morning light. Lila was the thread between them, but more and more, it wasn't just about her. There were moments now that hung between just the two of them, quiet, tentative, honest. Like when Ethan built a new shelf for the kitchen, and Charlotte surprised him with a jar of hand-labeled herb blends as a thank you. Or the afternoon he found her standing barefoot in the garden, eyes closed, just letting the breeze play through her hair. And he didn't dare say a word, afraid to break the spell. But the moment that changed everything came on a slow, soft evening in late August. They were in the garden, just the two of them. Lila had gone to a sleepover at a neighbor's house for the first time since they'd moved in. The quiet felt strange at first, like something had been forgotten, but it also opened a space neither of them had fully stepped into yet. They had just finished planting a row of lavender beside the marigolds when Charlotte leaned back on her heels and let out a long sigh. "She's growing up," she said softly. Ethan glanced at her, wiping his hands on a rag. "Yeah, faster than I can keep up. She's bright, brave." Charlotte's voice dipped lower. "She trusts people, even after everything." He looked at her then, not just a glance, but really looked. The way the fading light caught the gold in her hair, the faint smudge of dirt on her cheek, the way she always noticed the little things about Lila, the way a mother would. "I think she sees something in you," Ethan said gently. "Something safe." Charlotte's breath caught. "I don't know if I'm that person. You are to her." They stood in silence for a long moment, the hum of late summer cicadas rising around them like music no one had planned. Then Ethan spoke again, his voice lower now. "You are to me, too." Charlotte turned toward him slowly. Their eyes met, and this time neither looked away. It wasn't sudden, the way he reached for her hand. It wasn't rushed, the way their fingers laced together like it had always been meant to happen. There was no grand declaration, no desperate pull, just a simple truth settling quietly between them. When he leaned in, it was hesitant, reverent, like asking a question. And when their lips met, it was soft, tentative, but steady, a promise whispered in the quiet of twilight. When they parted, neither of them spoke right away. Then Charlotte let out a breathy laugh, half shaken. "I didn't expect that." "Me either," Ethan admitted, smiling. "But I'm not sorry." She looked down at their joined hands. "Neither am I." They walked back toward the house together under a sky turning violet, their shoulders brushing, fingers still intertwined. That night, as they sat on the porch sipping tea, Charlotte broke the silence. "I've been afraid," she said, "of letting this mean too much, of losing it before it even had the chance to become real." Ethan looked at her, his gaze unwavering. "We can be afraid, and still choose it anyway." She nodded slowly, then rested her head gently against his shoulder. And in that quiet, wrapped in the scent of lavender and wood smoke, they let the world go still, just long enough to believe in what was growing. Because some love doesn't arrive in a blaze of passion. It comes slowly, softly, rooted in kindness, fed by time, and when it finally blooms, it feels like coming home. Autumn crept in quietly. The mornings came cooler now, the breeze carrying with it the scent of fallen leaves and chimney smoke. Willowbend Farm wore the season well, trees blushing with amber and gold, the garden slowing its bloom but still full of life. And in the quiet rhythm of each day, something deeper had taken root between Ethan and Charlotte. They moved together with ease now, not just as partners in work, but in something more honest, more lasting. Ethan had built a bench at the far end of the garden, beneath the apple sapling Lila had named Clara. It was their favorite spot now. In the evenings, the three of them often sat there watching the sky change colors, sharing stories, or just being still. One afternoon, as golden light filtered through the branches, Charlotte led Ethan by the hand to that very bench. Lila was spending the weekend with Elma, giving them rare, quiet space. "I made something for you," Charlotte said as they sat, her voice unusually shy. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Should I be nervous?" She laughed, then reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small box, handcrafted from old barnwood, smooth and oiled to a soft sheen. Inside, resting on a piece of dried lavender, was a ring. Simple, wooden, but carved with care. Ethan stared at it, confused at first. Then she met his eyes. "I know it's not traditional," she said gently, her voice trembling just enough to make it real. "But you've rebuilt this house. You've rebuilt my heart, and I don't want to spend another season pretending I'm not sure what this is." He was frozen, still holding the box, as she added, almost breathless, "Ethan Cole." She paused, her voice trembling but certain. "Will you build a life with me? Not just this house?" For a heartbeat, time itself stilled around them. Then he laughed, a soft, stunned, full-hearted sound, and nodded, eyes suddenly bright. "Yes," he said, voice thick. "Yes, absolutely." Charlotte exhaled with a shaky laugh as he pulled her into a kiss. Not urgent, not rushed, just full of quiet joy. When they finally broke apart, she leaned her forehead to his and whispered, "I didn't think I'd ever ask that question, and I didn't think I'd ever get to answer it," he murmured. Behind them, the wind rustled the branches. The apple tree bent gently, like it too was nodding its approval. They sat there until the sky turned orange and the light faded from the fields. No grand crowd, no fanfare, just two hearts, a quiet farm, and a love that had learned to grow slowly until it bloomed. A year passed in the quiet way seasons often do at Willowbend Farm. Subtle shifts in light, in temperature, in the color of leaves and the way the wind moved through the fields. The farmhouse stood taller now, not just because of new beams and fresh paint, but because it had been filled finally with life again. Laughter echoed off the walls, fresh bread baked in the oven, and the scent of wildflowers drifted in through windows left open on purpose. Charlotte and Ethan never did have a big wedding. Instead, one crisp spring morning, they stood beneath the apple tree Clara, with Lila in a white dress and flower crown between them, holding both their hands. Elma read a few verses, neighbors brought jam and pies, and the vows were simple. "We choose each other," Charlotte had whispered. "And we choose this," Ethan said, motioning gently to the land, to the life, to Lila. It was the only kind of wedding they needed. Now, months later, as summer began to hum quietly across the fields, Charlotte stood barefoot in the kitchen, humming as she stirred lemonade in a pitcher. Her belly, softly rounded, pressed against the edge of the counter. She smiled as she felt the flutter of tiny feet from within. Out in the garden, Ethan knelt beside Lila, showing her how to brace the trellis for the morning glories. She listened intently, brow furrowed in concentration. Her sunflower patch had doubled since last year, and she insisted on naming every plant. Charlotte had stopped correcting her after the first 30. When the three of them sat down for lunch under the old willow, it felt like a picture they would carry in their hearts forever. Later that evening, Charlotte sat alone on the porch steps, a cup of tea in hand, watching the horizon shift from amber to indigo. Ethan joined her, sliding onto the step beside her with the ease of someone who knew exactly how she liked her quiet. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" she asked, her voice low. "All the time," he replied. She smiled softly. "It's strange. I came here to disappear, and instead, I was found." "You didn't need to be rescued, Charlie," Ethan said, turning toward her. "You just needed somewhere to grow again." Charlotte reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "And you. I needed you." He leaned in, resting his forehead to hers. You gave me back a future. They stayed like that for a long time. Inside, Lila was reading to the baby bump, her voice animated as she acted out characters from the secret garden. You're going to love it here, she said with confidence. There's a tree named Clara, and cookies that sometimes burn, and a daddy who fixes everything, and a Charlotte who makes the garden bloom. And if you're lucky, she'll let you help with the roses. Outside, the stars blinked into view, one by one, and beneath them, a house once broken stood whole again, not because of the wood or nails or even the paint, but because of what had taken root within it: love, patience, second chances. And when they do, they bloom in the hearts of those brave enough to plant them.